Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Fireside Tales, episode 50. And this being November the 8th, I want to lead everything off this evening by saying happy birthday to my mom, Pam Ackerman, who is in the chat. And let's see, who else is already here? Christina Beelan is early, bright and early. Angelica Bolschweiler, hello. Ruth Sanchez. Kathy B. Hello, Dari. Anna Gianavola. Michelle Vanderpool. Hello, Kelsey Blaine Gibson. I see Joe Warren also logged in. David Benjamin with a comment in German, greeting in German. Hey, man. Actually, David, tonight's question that I selected for Ask Hunter Anything is about Nazis. Nothing says happy birthday, Mom, like a little story about Nazis. No. David, to clarify, the way I looked last week is what Hunter looks like. This is the disguise. So, yep, my head and face is naked. There are people that are watching this on the radio, There are people that are listening to this on the radio that are just going, what are they talking about? What is he saying that they're talking about? Yeah, indeed. My Bluetooth. Let's see. My reception's a little funny, so I'm going to see if I can clarify that real quick. Okay. Had to unplug and replug. The Ethernet is back on. Okay, we are good. Yeah. So tell Olive and Ray it's still me. Yeah, it's hair. It'll grow back. But it won't grow back before next week. Which reminds me, so special announcement. There will be no YouTube shows from me personally next week, the week of November 15th. So both Fireside Tales on Monday will not happen, and the Thursday Lovecast will not happen next week. I look substantially different all of a sudden because I'm going to be shooting a series of music videos, or rather I've been hired to star in a series of music videos for a country album. I think it's ambitious. They're going to shoot like 9 music videos over the course of 6 days, I believe. And it's the same characters. And like the album has one sort of central story, as it were, and all the music videos will attempt to tell the story in sequence, and they're going to be releasing those music videos in the order that they happen in the album, and so unfold the story that way. Olive, look at me. I'm in the box, and I look different all of a sudden. So, yes, yeah, I was hired as an actor. Christina's got it. I actually did sing one bit on the album, but we don't know if that is actually going to go in to the album or not. I was hired for the video first, and then singing a part on the album was a second thought afterward. So, yeah. I think I'm gonna open this evening. So, tonight's theme is all about stuff Mom wanted to hear. It being her birthday, it seems appropriate. I thought I would open with one of my favorite poems and one of Mom's. This one, I think this is a shortened version. This is an abridged edit. Let me give Michelle something that she can edit this into. This is A Great Wagon by Rumi. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. Yeah, I love that one. All right, one more poem before we launch into tonight's short story. And this is called The Rose Family by Robert Frost. The rose is a rose, and was always a rose, but the theory now goes that the apple's a rose, and the pear is, and so's the plum, I suppose. The deer only knows what will next prove a rose. You, of course, are a rose, but we're always a rose. Yeah. All right. So, a little side note to Christina about this story that I'm about to read. I did not remember until I was reviewing this story for tonight's show. But this story must have been where we got the phrase for Wolfgang, along with the accompanying voice of Madam. I totally did not remember that coming from a particular place, but yeah, the cat in this story, you'll hear. All right, so I read some Louisa May Alcott on shows before, and this story, I think I actually read this story once originally back in January, maybe, perhaps. But as I said, this story is for Mom as a birthday request. This is A Happy Birthday by Louisa May Alcott. A certain fine old lady was 73 on the 8th of October. The day was always celebrated with splendor by her children and grandchildren, but on this occasion, they felt that something unusually interesting and festive should be done because Grandma had lately been so very ill that no one thought she would ever see another birthday. It pleased God to spare her, however, and here she was, almost as well and merry as ever. Some families do not celebrate these days, and so miss a great deal of pleasure, I think, but the people of whom I write always made a great deal of such occasions, and often got up very funny amusements, as you will see. As Grandma was not very strong, some quiet fun must be devised this time, and the surprises sprinkled along through the day, lest they should be too much for her if they all burst upon her at once. The morning was fine and clear, and the first thing that happened was the appearance of two little ghosts, all in white, who came prancing into the old lady's room while she lay placidly watching the sunrise and thinking of the many years she had seen. "A happy birthday, Grandma!" cried the little ghosts, scrambling up to kiss the smiling old face in the ruffled nightcap. There was a great laughing and cuddling and nestling among the pillows before the small arms and legs subsided and two round, rosy faces appeared, listening attentively to the stories Grandma told them till it was time to dress. Now, you must know that there were only two grandchildren in this family, but they were equal to half a dozen, being lively, droll little chaps full of all manner of pranks and considered by their relatives the most remarkable boys alive. These two fellows were quite bursting with the great secrets of the day and had to rush out as soon as breakfast was done in order to keep them from, quote, letting the cat out of the bag. A fine dinner was cooked, and Grandma's favorite niece came to eat it with her, bringing a bag full of goodies and a heart full of love and kind wishes to the old lady. All the afternoon, friends and presents kept coming, and Madame, in her best gown and most imposing cap, sat in state to receive them. A poet came with some lovely flowers. The doctor brought a fine picture. One neighbor sent her a basket of grapes, and some poor children, whom Grandma had clothed and helped, sent her some nuts that they had picked all themselves, while the grateful mother brought a bottle of cream and a dozen eggs. It was very pleasant, and the bright autumn day was a little harvest time for the old lady who had sowed love and charity, which she had broadcast with no thought of any reward. The tea table was ornamented with a splendid cake, white as snow outside, but rich and plummy inside, with a happy posy stuck atop the little Mont Blanc. Mrs. Trott, the housekeeper, made and presented it, and it was so pretty, all voted not to cut it until evening, for the table was full of other good things. Grandma's tea was extra strong and tasted unusually nice, with Mrs. Hosey's rich cream in it. She felt that she needed this refreshment to prepare her for the grand surprise to come, for the family's gifts were not yet given. The boys vanished directly after tea, and shouts of laughter were heard from Aunt Tribulation's room. What larks as they had up there no one knew, but everyone was sure they were preparing some fun in honor of the occasion. Grandma was not allowed to go into the study, and much tacking and rummaging went on for a time. Then all the lamps were collected there, leaving Grandma and Grandpa to sit in the parlor, talking gently, tenderly together by the soft glimmer of firelight, as they used to do 40 years ago. Presently, something scarlet and gold, feathery and strange, flitted by the door and vanished in the study. Queer little yells and the sound of dancing feet were heard. Then there was a hunt for the cat. Next, Mrs. Trott was called from the kitchen, and all but the boys came to escort Grandma to the scene of glory. Leaning on Grandpa's arm, she marched first. Then came Miss Kubity, the mother of the boys, bearing Aunt Carmine's picture, for this auntie was over the water and could not come. So, at Grandma's desire, her portrait was borne in the procession. Aunt Trib followed, escorted by Thomas Pibb, the great cat, with his best red bow on. Mrs. Trott and Belinda, the little maid, brought up the rear. A music box in the hall played the Grand March from Norma, and with great dignity, all filed into the study to behold an imposing spectacle. A fire burned brightly on the hearth, making the old-fashioned andirons shine like gold. All the lamps illuminated the room, which was trimmed with scarlet and yellow leaves. An arch of red woodbine, evergreen, and ferns from the White Mountains was made over the recess which held the journals, letters, and books of the family. For their name was Pen, and they all wrote so much that ink blots were found everywhere about the house, and a flock of geese lived in the backyard, all ready to have their quills tweaked out at a minute's notice. I don't believe that for a minute. Geese, they're selfish bastards. Before this recess stood a great armchair in which the father of Grandma had been laid as a newborn baby and nearly smothered by being sat upon by the fat nurse. This thrilling fact gave it a peculiar interest to the boys, for if great-grandpa had been smashed, where would they have been? In front of this ancient seat stood a round table loaded with gifts, and on each side stood an Indian chief in full costume, bearing lighted Chinese lanterns on the ends of their spears and war clubs on their shoulders. The arranging of these costumes had caused much labor and fun, for the splendid crowns, a foot high, were made of hen's feathers, carefully collected and sewn onto paper by Aunt Trib. The red shirts were fringed and bedecked with stuck about them. Daggers, hatchets, clubs, and spears were made by the lads themselves, and red army blankets hung gracefully from their shoulders. They had planned to paint their faces blue and red like the Fiji Islanders at Barnum's show, but Mrs. Kubity would not consent to have her handsome boys disfigure themselves. Kind of a harsh evaluation, if you ask me. So the only paint that they wore was nature's red in their cheeks and heaven's blue in their eyes, as they stood by Grandma's throne, smiling like a pair of very mild and happy little chiefs. It really was a fine sight, I assure you, and Grandma was quite overcome by the spectacle. So, she was introduced to her gifts as quickly as possible to divert her mind from the tender thought that all these fond and foolish adornments were to please her. Every gift had a poem attached, and as the presents were of every description, the verses possessed an agreeable variety. Here are a few as a sample. A small tea kettle was one gift, and this pleasing verse seemed to be bubbling out of its spout. A little kettle, fat and fair, to sit on Grandma's stove, to simmer softly, and to sing a song of Freddie's love. Another was this brief warning tucked into a matchbox. Oh, by the way, just a preamble for this little matchbox poem. In this era, matches were typically called Lucifer matches. And they, when you would strike them on the box, they would like flare like kind of like a modern day 4th of July sparkler as opposed to like a modern day match. And when they went out, they smelled just horrendous and smelled like sulfur, which I think was part of the reason that they were called Lucifer matches. So, another was this brief warning tucked into a matchbox. On this you scratch your little match. When the spark flies, look out for your eyes. When the Lucifer goes, look out for your nose. Little Jack gives you this with a birthday kiss. A third was rather sentimental from Mrs. Kubity. Within doth lie a silken tie, your dress to deck, soft and warm as daughter's arm round mother's neck. I love that they're all poets, they're all authors, they're all creative with a pen type folk, and so they all attached poems to their presents for Grandma. Now we get to the cat. Mr. Pibb presented a mousetrap. And in order to explain his poem, I must relate an incident in his varied career. Pibb had long been one of the family and was much respected and beloved by them all. In fact, he was so petted and stuffed that he grew as fat and big as a small dog and so clumsy that he could no longer catch the mice who dodged about among the dishes in the kitchen closets. In vain had Mrs. Tot shut him up in there. In vain had Aunt Trib told him it was his duty to clear the cupboards of such small deer. Poor fat Pibb only bounced about, broke the china, rattled down the pans to come out with empty paws, while the saucy mice squeaked scornfully and pranced about under his very nose. One day, Ms. Trib saw Pibb catch a squirrel, and having eaten it, he brought the tail to her as a trophy of his skill. This displeased his mistress, and she gave him away after a good scolding for killing squirrels and letting mice, his lawful prey, go free. Pibb was so depressed that he went into the bag without a mew or a scratch. Now, not only is this woman giving the cat away because he's too old and fat to catch mice anymore, the mechanism by which she's doing it is literally to stuff him in a bag, and was borne away to his new home in another part of the town. But he had no intention of staying, and after a day under the sofa, passed in deep thought, and without food or drink, he made up his mind to go home. Slipping out, he traveled all night and appeared next morning joyfully waving his tail and purring like a small organ. Aunt Trib was glad to see him, and when he had explained that he really did do his best about the mice, she forgave him and got the trap for him to give Grandma, that she might no longer be annoyed by having her private stores be nibbled at. Dear Madam, with respect, my offering I bring. The hooks all baited well and ready for a spring. No more the cunning mice your biscuits shall abuse, nor put their babes to sleep within your fur-lined shoes. The trap my work must do. Forgive your portly cat, for he, like you, has grown for lively work too fat. All larger, fiercer game I gallantly defy, and squirrel, rat, and mole beneath my paw shall die. So, with this solemn vow, T. Pibb his gift presents, and sprawling at your feet, purrs forth his compliments. which he actually did, and then sat bolt upright on the rug, surveying the scene with the dignity of a judge and the gravity of an owl. Such funny presents. A wood box, a water carrier, a blue and gold gruel bowl, and a black silk apron, a new diary, and a pound of remarkably choice tea. A pretty letter on birch bark, sealed with a tiny red leaf, and a bust of the wisest man in America were some of them. How the dear old lady did enjoy it all, and how grateful she was for the smallest trifle. An old friend sent her a lock of her mother's hair, and the sight of the little brown curl made her forget how white her own was, as she went back to the time when she last kissed that tender little mother 50 years ago. Fearing that tears would follow the smiles too soon, Aunt Trib announced that the famous Indian chiefs Ching Cheng Popocatépetl, for after the dance came a fight, and one chief tomahawked, scalped, and buried the other in the space of 2 minutes. But the ladies mourned so for the blonde little Pocky Hockey Cletteryar that he had time to come alive again and join in a hunting expedition, during which they shot all the chairs for buffaloes and deer and came home to roast a sofa pillow over their fire and feast thereupon with the relish of hungry hunters. These exploits were brought to an end by the arrival of more friends with more gifts and the introduction of the birthday cake. This was cut by the queen of the fete, and the panting chiefs handed it round with much scuffling of big moccasins and tripping over disarranged blankets. Then all filled their glasses with water and drank the toast. "Grandma, God bless her." After which the entire company took hands and danced about the big chair, singing in chorus, "Long may she wave, and may we all see her dear face live to see as bright and well at 74 as now at 73. The clock struck 10, and everyone went home, leaving the family to end the day as they began it, round Grandma's bed with goodnight kisses and the sound of her last words in their ears. It has been a beautiful and happy day, my dears. And if I never see another, you may always remember that I thought this one of my best and brightest birthday. Yeah. Thank you, Lolita Daydreamer, saying in the chat that she likes the new haircut. Yeah, Mom, I'm after the Lovecast last weekend. Mom says all my gifts are equally charming. I get stories, poems, and songs. So, yeah. Oh, good. Mom just commented, and so is this one of my brightest and best of birthdays. Hunter, thank you. You're welcome. I love you. Happy birthday. Okay. So, got a hefty question. And this was, by the way, the first question submitted to the new email address down here in the lower left-hand corner. The new email address specifically for questions is active and running. AskHunterAnything@gmail.com. So the first question was submitted by, I almost didn't open it because his name was Matt Spam. And yeah. So glad I did, though. Matt, I'm not sure where you are listening from. I'd be curious to know. Could be on one of the cable access stations, or it could be a podcast or the FM. But thank you for the question. Matt asked, man, this is hefty. This is a stout question. Matt asks, why didn't Albert Speer swing after the Nuremberg Trials? He was Minister of Armaments in a system famous for slave labor. He didn't even serve his full sentence. This has always vexed me. Signed, Matt Spam. Wow. Okay. So, just a little historical review for folks that don't know. So, Albert Speer was a high-ranking Nazi official. He was just an architect, but Hitler really loved the guy. And he was quite busily designing all kinds of roads and like civil engineering outlines for cities and all kinds of things in terms of what Germany was going to look like after Hitler had successfully overthrown Europe and eventually the rest of the world. As I recall, in 1943, Hitler's acting Minister of Armaments died in a freak accident. There was a plane crash. It wasn't like he was shot down or successfully assassinated. He just died from an accident. And from all accounts, as I understand it, Speer actually did not want the position. He was happy to continue on as an architect. But I'll say again, he loved Hitler. And this is kind of an insight about the guy. I'm not aware from any private writings of Albert Speer's that he particularly hated Jews. It seems that he just really loved Hitler. Now, none of what I'm about to say is intended to paint this guy as like the good Nazi. There were no good Nazis. There were just like worse and slightly less worse versions of them. So don't get the impression that I'm painting a picture that Speer deserved some like plush feather pillow treatment in this. But I am going to try to at least answer the question as faithfully as I can, put my perspective bring my perspective to the perspective of the people that were making the decisions at the time. Okay, so World War II ended in 1945. And by 1946, we had the Nuremberg Trials. I remember this was happening specifically in the summer of 46. I think it was wrapping up in like late August, as I recall. And so here's the thing. There were like 22, maybe there was 24 Nazis that were all being tried for war crimes and various atrocities, various crimes against humanity. And all the other Nazis that were being tried were not, it's not that they weren't taking it seriously, it's just that they were not recognizing the authority of the court. They were just kind of like, we were right, you guys were wrong, we're proud, and we're just going to go through the pomp and circumstance of your silly trials. And so the first thing that was different about Speer is that he did seem to take the trial seriously. He did grant the court an air of legitimacy. And what more is that Speer had just like this different, I guess I would call it a survival strategy. Speer knew that his best chance to survive was just to cooperate with any authority figure possible, particularly the Americans. And his cooperation had a really strange effect on his interrogators. One of the interrogators even said that he, and this is a direct quote, evoked in us a sympathy of which we were all secretly ashamed, unquote. So Speer, and there's another quote, leaned over backwards, unquote, to help, pointing the Americans to where they could find records of his reports to Hitler, many of which were held in a safe in Munich. Now, here's this detail I did not know before looking up a couple of details in order to answer this question. Speer, and this is a quote again from one of the investigators, Speer, quote, gave us the keys to the safe and the combination, and we sent somebody down to get these records, unquote. Now, this jumped out to me, that there was a safe that he kept records that were supposedly what he was giving straight to Hitler, and they were kept in this safe, right? The reason that this jumps out to me is when I read this, my first thought is, okay, if you are Speer and you know you're about to get charged with war crimes, it seems that you could hide files in different safes around Germany that would make you, Speer, look better depending on who is looking for what information. And all you do when the inevitable trial comes is just give them that one safe that has the stuff that you want them to read. So if somebody that was, say, friendly to Germany was for some reason trying Speer, maybe there was a different safe. Now, this is just completely my conjecture, but this immediately jumped into mind because I was listening to a radio call-in show where there was a guy claiming gift of prophecy that he was calling into this radio host skeptics show and was saying that he could back up his claims of prophecy because the day before his prophecy was supposed to be fulfilled, he wrote it in an email to himself. And the host really kind of amazed me in this little feat of logic, saying, I'm not impressed because you could have written 5 different emails and just now show me the one that came true or seemed to come true. And I'm like, oh man, I wonder if Speer did something like that with a safe. So, but that's really just a side detail. I kind of came down to a few things that was different about Speer. So, as we've already said, Speer was contrite, and he recognized the legitimacy of the court. So I think the Nazis, I think the tribunal wanted to make an example of him to the other Nazis and to the world by look, this guy is recognizing our authority. Speer also did some things at the end of World War II when the writing was on the wall. Now, if you're not familiar with how World War II ended, when the troops were really closing in on Hitler's last bunker, Hitler shot himself. Speer was one of the last to see Hitler alive. But in the last closing months of World War II, Hitler did this thing. He had this scorched earth plan. This is sometimes called his Nero decree. And this was to destroy any industrial facilities, supply depots, military equipment, infrastructure, anything that might be valuable to advancing enemy forces. Now, during the Nuremberg trial, Speer said that he was furious, Speer, and that Speer disobeyed Hitler's orders, transferring his loyalty from the Führer to the German people and the future of the nation. Now, presumably, he could back this up with the files that he kept in the safe that I already mentioned, that he could verify the existence of. But that would have gotten him shot for treason, and probably shot in really ugly ways, because basically, Hitler was saying to all that, destroy anything that is a resource that is about to be taken by the Allied forces. And Speer was like, no, Germany has to continue after World War II. So Speer was secretly going to all the places that Hitler was giving orders to be destroyed and telling the people in charge, hold on for a little while. Don't burn it down yet. Save this. We need to save Germany for the future Germans that are going to live here. So yeah, in that respect, Speer betrayed Hitler at the very end just to minimize the horrific impact that World War II was going to have. It was already going to be a catastrophe, but he did this just to try to turn the volume of chaos down just a little bit. So Speer was, as I said, not what you would call a good guy. Going back to Matt's original part of the question, that Speer was the Minister of Armaments in a system famous for slave labor. If you didn't know this about the Nazis, they kept slaves. So they basically, when they would conquer a country or a territory, or they would grab as many civilians as they could from that conquered nation or territory and put them to work in work camps. This isn't the same as the concentration camps. This isn't the same as extermination for merely being part of a particular race or nation, but they would enslave their captured, not hostages, they're captured prisoners of war, and they would just literally work them to death. They would work them until the prisoners of war, the slaves, would just fall over dead. Speer, when he became Minister of Armaments, kind of took a look around and said, this is just inefficient. We should take a little better care of our slaves, not because it's the right, good, or moral thing to do, but because we can get a lot more work out of them if we take just a little care of them. And so yeah, it's mind-boggling, but I guess the right thing to do would have been to not make them do forced slave labor. But somewhere there's this spectrum of the right thing to do, which you're not going to count on any Nazi to do under any circumstances, and then the worst wrong thing to do, and Speer did something kind of in the middle. Again, not going to paint this guy as like a good guy of history who just sort of fell in with the wrong crowd, but he ended up choosing more of a vaguely morally preferable course of action because it was more efficient. Again, in all of his writings before he was one of the SS, and in all of his writings after World War II, he never spewed anti-Semitism. He doesn't seem to have taken this position so endemic to the rest of the Nazis that the Jews just needed to be eradicated. He really just loved Hitler and really believed that Hitler had the best interest of Germany in his heart, in his mind. Eventually, Speer just said, okay, this is getting insane. And throughout the Nuremberg Trials, anytime that he could, Speer would really emphasize the danger of a fascist dictator coming into power at a time when the Industrial Revolution could make such great armies. So a couple of things, like words directly out of his mouth that kind of give the tenor of what he was saying while he was being tried for war crimes. Here's one. I didn't know. Now, this is specifically in reference to the concentration camps. This is specifically in reference to the Jewish genocide. He said, I didn't know. I should have known. I could have known, but I didn't. So he didn't take the just following orders path that is so cliche in this post-World War II conversation. It's not that he tried to avoid responsibility, but he did this kind of weird in-between dance. Another thing he said is, this was in a cross-examination. First, I should like to say, as you have so often mentioned my non-responsibility, that if in general these conditions had been true, on the basis of my statement yesterday, I should consider myself responsible. And here's the key phrase: I refuse to evade responsibility. Whether I knew or did not know, or how much or how little I knew, is totally unimportant when I consider what horrors I ought to have known about, and what conclusions would have been the natural ones to draw from the little I did know, he wrote. No apologies are possible. So, Speer was an interesting character in how he comported himself through the Nuremberg trials. And the little tiniest point of detail in your question, Matt, pointing out that he didn't even serve his full sentence. He actually did. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail, and he did serve the 20 years in jail. But that's not to say that that was just or appropriate, or that the world was in full balance. Speer may have been, and I've not really thought about this until right before the show, Speer may have been one of the first people in the history of book publishing to make a huge fortune from an atrocity that he had part of. Like nowadays in the modern United States, I think, I'm not sure if there are laws against this or if this is just a book publishing practice, that if someone is a serial killer, they don't get to then write a book about their crimes and then profit from the horrors that they perpetrated. Something like this happened in the O.J. Simpson trial. After the O.J. trial, evidently O.J. wrote a book, and I think there was a court order. I really should have looked up the details of this particular thing, but I think there was a court order saying that O.J.'s book proceeds had to go to the families of the slain victims. Well, Speer mostly wrote his book smuggling out on little pieces of toilet paper and things like that while he was in prison for 20 years. It's not like they gave him a quill and or typewriter and just allowed him to publish his memoirs. But yeah, he collected his notes in these surreptitious sort of ways. And then, after he was released from prison 20 years later, he authored a book called Inside the Third Reich. And it was a bestseller, and as far as I know, he made quite a fortune from it. As I recall, he died in 1981, and people were still interviewing him up to the day he died about his involvement, about personal details about Hitler. I recall someone asking him if Hitler's girlfriend, Eva Braun, was an attractive woman, and he evidently, no. So, wow. Killer question, Matt Spam. Man, quite a question. So yeah, I would boil it down to recap the answer. The Speer myth is, as it's sometimes referred to by historians, is the perception of Speer as an apolitical technocrat responsible for revolutionizing the German war machine. He displayed contrition, recognized the legitimacy of the Nuremberg Tribunal. He committed some treasonable offenses at the end to minimize the damage to Germany. He did enact everything that made the Germans treat their prisoner of war slaves better, even if it was not for any good moral reasons. He did actually do that. And yeah, he didn't ever seem to claim to hate Jews. He just loved Hitler. And beyond the rest of it, he was just extremely helpful to his interrogators and to the court and the court proceedings. So I'm not a World War II historian by any means. What I do seem to know or claim to know about World War II is usually from the backdrop of the science and the history that came out of World War II. Excuse me, the science that came out of the history of World War II. The history of science, that's really more like, that's more my bag. World War II put some of my favorite physicists under a roof together in what was called the Manhattan Project, where the Americans won the race to discover and implement the only atomic weapon ever used in the history of warfare. Before we go down the long and winding road as to whether or not that was a good or cool thing, all I could ever come to when I was at university and talking in the office hours with my physics teachers and various science teachers about this is, well, if the United States didn't get the atomic bomb, Hitler would have. And it's kind of hard to imagine a world in which Hitler got the atomic bomb. This much is for sure. Anyone living here in California, where I'm broadcasting from right now, would be speaking German. I'll give it a close second chance that they may be speaking Japanese, but probably be speaking German. Incidentally, Einstein was not in Europe or specifically Germany at the time, because the raising wave of anti-Semitism, he had fled Europe years before and found his new home in Princeton, New Jersey, where he started teaching. Einstein wrote a letter to Roosevelt informing Roosevelt of the possibility that a weapon could be devised that harnesses the power of splitting an atom. But Einstein himself would not then work on the project. Einstein was not part of the Manhattan Project. He refused on the ethical grounds of how hard that knot is to untangle. Let's see, I'm going to scroll through and see if I missed any questions in here. Yes, Emily Thatcher, I have met Mark Wahlberg a few times, actually. I did. Yeah, I was doing stunts in a movie. I wasn't doubling Mark Wahlberg. I was doing fight work in the film. Let's see. He kind of looks like the guy from the animated Lorax movie. I've not seen it. I'm not offended, I promise. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see, scrolling down. A lot about hair that I'm trying to... let's see. Okay, interesting. Patty Pinkstaff is saying, fascinating answer. Met one of the survivors at the Museum of Tolerance last year. Interestingly enough, I met a couple of old men in the locker room at a gym. It was in an LA Fitness. I don't even remember how many years ago this was now. And I looked over, and I'll be damned, I said they had numbers tattooed. I think it was on their forearms. I can't remember now. And when I saw these old men who were clearly friends and clearly had been for a long time, I recognized those tattoos, and I had to talk to them. I had to ask them about it. And, we talked for a little while in the locker room. But, yeah, the Nazis would frequently, if not completely, give Jewish concentration camp people would give him number tattoos, which was even worse because in the Jewish traditions, you can't have tattoos. And this was like, I thought that was a brilliant thing in the first X-Men movie. Magneto was a survivor of a concentration camp, and was rebelling against the government that wanted to gather the mutants together and give them things like identifying tattoos. And Magneto said, "By God, no one will ever tattoo me again." And it was really compelling. Great question, David. I'd have to think about that for a second. Here's an Ask Hunter anything. Where do you think rocket tech would be today if Werner von Braun hadn't survived the war, come over to the U.S.? That's a great question. As I consider it, I think we would have gotten there eventually. Yeah, I think we would have gotten there eventually, but it's likely that the moon landing would not have happened in '69, and I think that the Russians may have still beat us to put things in orbit, but that it would probably have been slightly later than Sputnik. I reserve the right to think about that more clearly and change my answer later, but just off the top of my head, that seems most likely. Ooh, Christy Davila. No, I've never heard of that book. Christy said, did anyone read The Tattooist of Auschwitz? Quite a book. I read a lot of World War II historical fiction. No, I've not read that book. I've not heard of it. But speaking of historical fiction, Christy, you might really like this series. It's an animated, not animated, what do you call animated novel, graphic novel. It's a series of graphic novels called Maus, spelled M-A-U-S. I first came across it in Italy, and so I read it all in Italian. And then I found it in English and reread it all in English. But it's Maus, subtitled My Father Bleeds History. And it's about a bunch of Jewish mice that are captured and overlorded and, let's just say, systematically repressed by a bunch of German cats. It is unreal. I mean, unreal. You really should... There you go. I was a little stuck on giving you a reading recommendation a couple of weeks ago, Christy Davila, but that's my reading recommendation for you. M-A-U-S, Maus. Okay, so I think we'll cut it off here, but I want to throw one name out for anyone that is within the sound of my voice. If you don't know what the James Webb Telescope is, you will want to know this before December. This is going to be the largest, most complex space project humanity has ever endeavored. It is a space telescope that will make the Hubble look like a toy by comparison. If it works, it has been, as I recall, the launches of this thing have been delayed. I think the first launch I ever read about was scheduled for 2007. And it's an extremely complex piece of technology. So one of the things that makes a telescope extremely powerful is the size of its reflector, its main mirror. The Hubble's mirror is massive. The James Webb Space Telescope, as I recall, I just did a quick back of the envelope calculation on this once, and I think the light collecting reflector on this is 2.5 times the size of the Hubble's. And they studied ancient Japanese origami to get this thing going, because the reflector has to be folded up so that they can get it into space to begin with. As I recall, looking at some engineering specs, there are almost 300 different single points of failure. So there are something like 290 steps that if this goes wrong, nothing will work after this step. And so a lot of people are, nervous about it. For this reason, the launch has been delayed since 2007, if I'm remembering that correctly. Because we're going to put it up there so far away that we don't have spaceships that can go fix it if it does not deploy properly. It is going to be able to look for the basic building blocks of life around various exoplanets in very, very far, far, far away star systems. This thing is so sensitive that from the Earth, it would be able to see the heat of a single bee on the moon. It will be able to look back in time, as any telescope does, at the newest baby galaxies that were only being formed about 13.8 billion years ago, when the universe was sort of cooling down and organizing just after the Big Bang. And it's currently been rescheduled to go up in December. Now, we'll find out if its launch is delayed again. And if its launch is delayed again, I'm not going to be impatient, because this thing has got to work. But there's just a little bit of an overview of what's going on there. All right. So with that, I'm going to sign off. And I'll see you all Thursday night for the Lovecast. I'll remind you again that next week I won't be doing any live casts on. So a week from tonight on Monday, I'll be off filming, and a week from Thursday, I'll be off filming. But everything is going to be on for this coming Thursday. All right. Thank you all very much. I love you. And I think Dancing with Dari is going to be on tomorrow night. And, 6:30. There it is in the chat. And Amanda on Demanda is going to be on Wednesday at 7:30. I love you all. Good night.